good song. All those songs on my radio. You heard Pink Floyd the other day, Comfortably Numb. All right, today's day 2. John, did you calm down? Now we're going to deal with all these issues. We're at a tipping point is what we are. Let me tell little stories. I usually talk about 30 minutes, but I wanted you to hear Boston. For many years when I worked on the streets, and I'm going to tell you my normal, I'm like most of you, when I heard a lot of stories, the stories I never really mentioned is the ones where the guys had told me that there's a lot of homicides that take place that are unreported. These are stories that were told me for many years that they kill people out there. A few years ago, when I went through a lot of stuff, I told some people, I said, you don't know what they do out here. And people were like, sometimes you don't want to believe things because it will make you be like, I don't want to believe a certain thing. And I would tell people, I said, you don't have to believe it or not. Somebody asked me not too long ago when they saw that I told them, I'm not proving anything to anybody. I'm going to speak truth is what I'm going to do. And so somebody wanted to ask me, but, you know, can I ask you how these things go? I said, I'm not here to. And then the person said, well, so what? They're doing these things. I said, right. I said, you're the one that asked me. I'm not trying to prove nothing to you. But over the years, those were the ones that, various friends, these guys are all, many of them in prison, did time, but they would tell me. The guys knew that I was doing ministry. They knew I was for real. But they would tell me, just like normal people you or I would know, and they would say that a lot of killings go on out in that Flower Bluff, a lot of murders that are unreported. And for many years, I would always respond and say, I don't really think so, you know. And they would swear, no, you don't know. I'd say, well, you know, they'd find bodies. He said, no, there's ways they don't find bodies. I had a friend once. I used to defend that cop. I used to defend them. I used to say, it was very common. Many years people say, oh, there's drug dealing going on over there and this. And I would say, well, I don't know if he knows about it. Or one time, I won't give the names here, but one time somebody stole from somebody. It was very public. They knew. Came out later. And the cop never pressed charges. But he made the person admit it publicly. These areas of Flower Bluff, where you see me do meetings last year, and a lot of these areas are, you have cops owning places, drug dealers out of these places. Also, homeless ministries used to operate in those places, you know. So it's all like a mixture. But it was common on the street, so-and-so stole money from an officer. And I always thought, I wonder why he never pressed charges on that guy. And then I realized because it took place in the same properties that you hear me discuss. So if an officer's involved with illegal activity, he ain't going to do it. Even though on a drop of the bat, he'll plant evidence on Jesse and put him in jail. So I realized there was stuff that was true, things that were true. But the things about people being killed out there, never reported, bodies hidden, I always would say, this is not a recent story, this is 20 years people told me, I always would say, I don't think so. These guys would, no, it's true. When you have, I saw a case the other day, or a while ago, there was 2 black people in a car. This was in the news, not any particular site, but there were 2 black people in a car, and the car backfired in front of the police station, I think. It's a few months back. And they thought there was gunfire. Now, I can understand that. Maybe you thought it was gunfire. And the car took off. And the cops had followed, and This went to trial, this case. And they jumped, and when the car finally stopped, the people were scared, obviously. They have that history. And they shot like 20 shots through the windshield. They showed the pictures of it and all. I saw it on the news, online. And then they determined that, yes, it was just a backfire of a car, and they murdered those two black people, a man and a woman, I believe. So it went to court, and the judge ruled, yes, they murdered him in cold blood, but they could not prove that the bullet came from the cop that was on the car, shot 17 shots and killed him. So they all are still on the job. If you had a gang, it's a law in this country. If somebody kills somebody else, and everyone else that's there was a girl, Lady in the Bluff, she died. Her son, years ago, was with somebody else, and a crime was committed, and somebody was killed, but her son was not the shooter or anything, but he was with the group when it happened, and all of them went to jail. So the law of the land is, if you're with somebody and a homicide takes place, all of you are accomplices and you're all charged with that same homicide. In this case, the judge said, yeah, that you murdered those two black people because the car backfired, but because you can't prove that the bullet that killed the person was the 17, or the one, the cop that was on the window killing him, you're all off the hook and you're back on the job to kill again. What I'm trying to show people is the law has become unjust in this country. The law has become unjust. Any normal city, USA, you should have a policy. If you're an officer, you can't own a drug house. Whether you are actually dividing up the profits or not. Just the fact that it's common knowledge in Flower Bluff that people buy drugs at that house. I gave addresses. None of that. I've reported these things. That alone should be, you know what, we don't think it looks good for our community that a cop owns a drug house. Nope. Never mind whether or not there's profits being made and divided and divvied up. You know, the Hannah Overton case, I'm not too far from downtown. I didn't go all the way, but that's your courthouse over there. I never was a very strong defender. Hannah Overton is a local case that made it to the national media because Andrew Bird, her stepson, who they were going to adopt, died under her care. And it was a very big case, but then there was an actual legitimate debate whether or not the boy had a disease called pica, which is an overeating disorder, because in the trial they did here in Corpus Christi, they found her guilty, and I think they gave her life. Now she's out. It went to the courts, and finally but I'll never forget during that case, there were two prosecutors at the time. I forget the name, Sandra Eastwood maybe, and another lady prosecutor. And both of these two lady prosecutors, one of them later came out and said, no, we lied. We did false stuff. Prosecutor that prosecuted the case. If you have two prosecutors and one later says, no, we lied, she came out publicly. I forget that lady's name. I think she's still doing some other job in law enforcement. You had a case of, it was a very sad case. Two young kids were killed in a drive-by. And this was a couple years ago. Very bad. But then, during the case, they had two kids. They said, we think it's them. And the guy at the house initially said, I think the father initially made statements. No, we didn't see who it was. We don't know who it was. Now later, he was like the key witness. He said, no, okay, I lied. This is who it was. Okay? Then he gave a description of the car. They found the gun. Now the gun was not the gun that was used in the killing. I believe that's what happened. And the description of the car was not the car. So the key witness, his first statement was, no, I didn't see anything. But then supposedly he recanted and said, no, but all the description, even the gun. And then the other witness in another court hearing before the actual case also said that they asked him to lie or he was going to tell the truth. And they convicted the first kid, and there were two. And they were going for the second one. And the second one, they finally said, well, we had insufficient evidence, we dropped the charges. And I remember the lawyer for those boys, I'm sure it was a public defender, he said they got the wrong kids. There was no evidence, nothing. If you have prosecutors saying we lied, those cases immediately should be thrown out. But they continued, they were going to retry. I always wondered how much, if you're involved with, if the drug stories of the hits, killings, supposedly if there's somebody that's a witness or whatever, that you get these guys killed, and then they don't get reported because they're involved with illegal activity with law and all. I always questioned, are they doing these things? I don't doubt it anymore. And I've given statements, I've written things. I don't doubt it anymore. That's why I said when you have cases like you see these, I watch these old mafia cases where they were all colluding to kill witnesses. Those things do go on. There was a case of a judge. I'm just giving you cases I remember reading. And he, I think it was ex-wife or something, but they planted, this judge had some other guy plant drugs on the bottom of his wife's car, I believe. They pulled her over. She went to prison. Took a couple years. Oops. We won't do it again. You are no longer doing law. These are all over the country I'm giving you. That's not law. In the Frederick Douglass comment I posted the other day, which was Frederick Douglass was the slave who came north and joined with the abolitionists. But I read that statement. It was long. I posted it. But what he was trying to say was the church. He spoke to the church in that statement, Christians. He said, you don't understand your reasoning. I'll give you an example. I'm reading through the New Testament, and there are many passages that say, slaves, obey your masters. Do not rebel. Do not try to become free. There's more than one passage that says that very clearly. And in those same passages, or where it says, obey every law of the land because the ordinances are of God. And many Christians interpret that as saying, no matter what, even if they're corrupt judges, even if there's cops putting hits out on people, you obey those laws. Many of those same Christians, if you showed them the slavery verses, they would say, they would have some way, obviously, which I agree with, to say, well, those slavery verses really didn't apply to the freeing of the slaves in the United States, which I agree. The case I usually make when I teach that is the early church at its nascent stage, beginning stage, was not going to mount a rebellion against anti-slavery. Now, those verses are not dealing with the same slavery that we had in the U.S., which was also a wicked abomination. But we come to a way that we don't just blindly obey that. And Frederick Douglass also mentioned in that speech, which I've mentioned before, he said when you celebrate Independence Day, he said what you're celebrating is a time where people in this country decided that the ruling country, England, all their courts and laws, that they would no longer be under them. And they mounted a violent rebellion where we killed. I do never advocate that, even though you have cops that can make statements that they're going to make people disappear in public, which is a murder threat. Still be on the job. But what Douglass was saying was, you yourselves, American people, white audience he was talking to, he says, you recognize that there was a time where law was unjust. And all of you broke from that, broke from the crown. So what I'm trying to tell people is, many Christians, pastors, when you read those pro-slavery passages, and then you also read the passages about the authorities, you have to understand that there comes time where government becomes corrupt or authority becomes corrupt. I can give you a case. I was watching the Central Park 5 last night. Now, I didn't watch it all the way through, but I've watched it before. And this was back in the 1980s in New York City. A jogger in Central Park, where I'll be in a few weeks or a few days, she was raped. Watch this documentary. You can find it. Called the Central Park 5. So they got 4 black kids, young kids, and they framed these boys. They framed them, and I'll just get to the important things I want you to see. And they threatened these kids. They lied. These are New York City cops. And the prosecutors, very public, they put these kids in prison. They put one of them, 16-year-old kid in Rikers Island, who grew up. Over time, one of the guy who actually committed the rapes was in prison with the other guys. And there was an incident that happened, watch a documentary, and he realized, he said, he confessed. Now, there was no doubt, once he confessed, he had a history. He was in there for raping somebody else. So the system still did not want to hear his confession. Understand that at that stage, when they realize, oh, we got these kids, we did a great injustice, 4 black kids. Those New York City cops were all criminals by stopping the freedom. And that other guy who confessed, the reason he confessed, if you watch it, he ran into one of the kids who was now grown older. I think he had a hearing problem, this one kid. And they had a little altercation in Rikers or in prison. And the guy who committed the rape, he knew that he was guilty and these kids got framed. But they fought over a TV. And then at the end he said, the guy who knew he was guilty, he told the other kid, he said, I'm sorry, I want to apologize to you. And the other guy said, it was no big thing, but what he meant was he wanted to apologize that they framed those boys. They ruined those boys' lives. They did it purposefully, with malintent, with wickedness and corruption, wearing uniforms and badges, those cops. And then when that guy wanted to confess, they did not want him to confess. And he says, he makes a recording, I believe. He says, I'm doing all I can. I'm even willing to admit that and nobody wants to hear me. That's not law. You rebelled against the crown for much less than that. You had a bloody rebellion against the crown. So what I want you to understand is none of these, I was very hesitant to believe the collusion with law enforcement and gangs and drug deals and actual, according to some of my friends, killing people out here. I was very slow over the years to believe any of those stories. But more than one occasion over many, many years, when I said to my friends, I don't think so, they'd say, no, you don't know. So what I want people to understand is we are often slow to want to believe these things. I tried my hardest not to just, when people told me so-and-so did this and this, when I wrote those things and sent them to our county attorney, I sent them to prosecutors, and all these letters I sent for years now, I would always say, look, this is what the guys are telling me. Just check it out. I said, I don't know if they're telling me the truth or not. But you should, even if you have a possible cop making a death threat, Albert Hoffman. Albert's told me that that cop came up to him in the brush. The guys live like over the years where we live, there's a lot of like areas of fields, and they live out there. One time he said the cop came up to him, and Albert said, there's no warrant on me. What do you do? He said, I'll just make something up. Don't make a difference. I do whatever I want out here. He said that in front of everybody. This is very common, very common. If you have any even possibility of collusion with drug deals, owning drugs, the law is not the law. You've got to understand that. So what this case I'm telling you is when you read all those verses that you say, well, we're never supposed to, those verses do say obey. And I prayed for the authorities today because it's my Monday morning and I pray a certain prayer time. I shared that with you guys. So today I prayed for those in authority, judges, courts, everything. You pray for God to judge them? No. I pray, bless them, cause them to do righteousness. Sometimes they'll say, and those who are wielding the rod in unrighteousness, remove them. But this means if you have wickedness like in Egypt, they're going to put Morsi to death. I understand Morsi's a Muslim and all, Muslim Brotherhood, but that's very corrupt what they're doing there. So I'll also pray, remove unjust authorities. There are many, many scriptures where it says God deals in the courts of men, false testimony, things like that. So this is a part, this is an aspect. I wanted to let you know I was very slow over the years to believe that aspect of. That's the most disturbing aspect, that there are murders that go unreported and they're in collusion with criminal activity, possibly authorities. That was the most disturbing aspect that I ever heard. And for many years, when the guys told me that, I would always say, I don't think so. I said, well, you're going to find bodies. No, they got ways you don't find bodies. Don't ever be surprised that these things take place. These things have been taking place in the whole history of this country. So don't ever be surprised. What disturbed me about like these other cases was Hannah Overton. What disturbed me was you'd actually have people making statements. I don't know how legitimate, but to say, no, they asked me to lie, prosecutors asked me to lie, and you should have a complete, there was a newspaper article, I read it at the ranch, this was a few months ago, but it said there were accusations that they were purposely doing all types of illegal activity in the prosecutor's department, and some said, well, we think it's just because of the inexperience. The article tried to be fair. The news media here does not cover these things. You had a guy killed a few weeks ago. I think it's one of the streets I do a lot of outreach around. I forget if it was Leopard Street or Agnes, but a cop was driving down. It was at night, and he didn't see the other person, I think it was a black person, ran him over and killed him. Now, I want you to understand, I'm going to give you a little experience of my job. Many firefighters and police officers, we have a law, and we usually let the rookies know this, but a lot of the guys don't obey this. You're not allowed to, we used to have what's called Code 1, Code 2, Code 3, and then we eliminated, at a fire department in Kingsville, we eliminated Code 2. Code 1 was you're just going, but you're not running the lights and all. Code 2, we used to say you run the lights, but no siren. Code 3, lights and siren. We got rid of Code 2 because by law you can only go in a police vehicle or a ambulance or fire truck. You can only go a certain speed over the speed limit. Forget what it was, but you're not allowed to ever speed, ever. Not even one by law, not even a mile over the speed limit if you're on a non-emergency run. And the reason is because you could, if you're speeding at night, even just to go pick up dinner, you could kill somebody by accident. Now, I don't know if this officer here was speeding. They said he was a veteran officer. But the way the media reported it was, they showed the pictures, some maybe posted, but they said it was at night. Normally you investigate, was that vehicle speeding? I don't think they do any of that here. I don't think, because if you're speeding, I mean, potentially it's a manslaughter. Because you're not supposed to speed without the lights. And obviously, emergency vehicles, cops and firemen, they skirt that law more because we often speed, but that's because we were doing our jobs. So that's where you had to let the young guys know, look, don't think you can do that. I don't know if they investigated, if they looked at skid marks, I'm not sure. But the media immediately reported and said, oh, the officer's very upset, he's so brokenhearted, and it was that man's fault. you need to report, what about the victim? Was there anything investigated? When I told you that case of about a month ago, I guess, a lady had called, this is after Chief Simpson passed away, the police department, was in grieving, and some lady called. It was in Corpus Christi area, maybe Calallen, but that's still Corpus Christi, and her son they wanted to admit him to a psych ward or something, and they shot that boy. That maybe the kid had a gun. I don't know what the media never backs up, but when the media reported it, they interviewed the cops, said, oh, it must have been hard being the chief had passed away to have fulfilled your duty. They said, well, we're doing the best we can. Look, you need to find out whether or not that was a legitimate shooting. You don't say, well, it must have been hard for you to shoot him. Look if it was legitimate. If it was legitimate, fine. If this man that was killed a few weeks ago that got run over, look, I'm not out to get cops that are doing good things. But you have to look into it. Because of the history of the things I tell you, obviously, I realize there is no internal anything. So, cover up much as you can. So no, we're going to do this stuff. There's so many scriptures I can give you guys. From the Mass, they didn't give the scripture Sunday, but it was Ezekiel 2, because I looked it up online in Daily Mass reading. And it said, told Ezekiel, these are the callings of prophets. Jeremiah, God said to Jeremiah, say all that I want you to say. This day I've made you a defense city, a wall against everyone. It says, speak the truth. Ezekiel chapter 2, it said the same idea, the same concept. Speak everything that I tell you to speak. Don't be afraid of their faces. When you have intimidation that rises to the level of so-and-so might kill you just through word on the street and understanding that all these things are actually going on, that's absolute lawlessness. And for this to be known, common, Albert said, oh yeah, they do that this one guy does it all the time to us. Not killing, but, I'll do anything I want. If I see you here again, I never want to see you here. And if I see you here, I'll make up evidence, plan it. Case. Common. It became a joke on the street with the guys. They know. Report it. You report it. You leave the place, you go report it. What are you doing reporting one of our officers threatening you? Get the hell out of it. I'm not saying that's why they don't report it. Report it again, you might die. All across the country, you have collusion taking place. There comes a time where the level of it rises, where the system changes. I'm in the TMRS, Texas Municipal Retirement System, which is a statewide system, that's my firefighter retirement comes out of that. Corpus Christi doesn't have that. Corpus has its own city thing. But I think we have to look at the possibility of the dismantling of civilian departments. You say, you're kidding. Look, I think you got to look at the dismantling. Get rid of them. Find another avenue, another venue. Take the money. Their retirement's going to be in trouble anyway because it's only a city retirement. I believe it's reached the level from my many years of hearing all these things that, reorganize. John, we might be homeless. If you go, be homeless. I'll help you when you're homeless on the street. So what do we do? About 30 minutes. Now we're going to deal with them. You never make false accusation. And from all of these things, even these other cases, prosecutors saying, we lied. Prosecutors. And still not. You're building a foundation that's going to crumble. You're building a foundation that's going to crumble. It's when the Ten Commandments, false testimony is in there. That foundation will crumble. It's not just personal stuff. I'm giving you cases where kids are coming out and saying, no, you got the wrong guy, you murdered somebody, I admit to the murder, and they still don't want to accept it because of their own positions in society. They're building their image as a famous prosecutor, not just here, anywhere. So that system is a political system. It's built upon lies, threats, actual murders. I gave you the name of that prosecutor. His name was Berggren, and he went into private practice. They were putting hits on witnesses. Don't ever think these things don't happen. These things do happen. Okay? So that's today, the part of the church, the prophetic calling, which we all have, is to speak to these issues as well. So today, I want you to understand, I was very slow to believe a lot of the things that I heard, especially in that area, that there's actual killings that are taking place, sanctioned possibly with people that are involved with law enforcement and all. That was very slow. Now, I don't have a particular, if I knew a particular thing, they say there's a body out here, I'd write it. And these were many stories over many years that I didn't have specifics on. Or else I would have written it. I would have said, hey, if I ever saw a body, forget it. I'd report that immediately. I'm an ex-firefighter. I'm just saying, or retired. So I'm just saying, I was very slow but my friends were very adamant. No, you don't know, John. So we are slow to believe things, but humanity is corrupt. God forgives us for sins, but if it's inherent in the system, then that system either has to be dismantled or other agencies, federal agencies and all, come in and do something about that system. That would be what's just. God bless you guys. Talk to you tomorrow.